up, we've got Sunil Shah, and they're going to be talking about sustainability under pressure. Welcome to the stage.
That's the one. Okay. So I'm going to talk about sustainability. We've spoken quite a bit about it as well over this morning. And I'm also really happy because it makes me feel younger because I've only spent 28 years in the sector. So I'm quite happy about that. And my background, again, I came from the cohort from Johnson Controls, starting off and looking at what sustainability was within the sector and starting to develop the tools and the systems. But what I'll talk mainly about is some of the work that we've done through the SFMI programme, which has been running now for about 13 years, and looking at how do we implement sustainability, not looking downwards into the sector, but how do we communicate that to the C-suite, but also how do we communicate that to UK PLC as well. So a little bit about who we are, that's up on the screen. I'm not going to read it all, but an awful lot of what we try and do is to engage with other professional institutes as well to talk about how do we embed some of the key principles of sustainability within day-to-day practices, within learning programs, within data programs and data systems as well. So again, it's bringing the next future through, but it's also about how do we provide the governance and the information for decision making. So, going back to 1980s programs. So looking at where we are and what's happened. We've mentioned already there's a big hype around sustainability in the last few years. Any Americans in the audience today? So what we have seen though is not much of a change in terms of what organisations are trying to do around their sustainability programme. There has been a big hype that we had in the early part of this decade. Lots of organisations jumping on bandwagons, making statements and commitments. We have seen an awful lot of that drop off because there is little purpose in doing that anymore. But those who are committed are still continuing to be committed and still continuing to drive forwards, implement their programmes and to communicate and talk about it. So we've not seen much change in the progression of sustainability overall of what we're trying to do. The other key part that we have seen, and I've had lots of conversations about this, there is a global affiliation around a single common approach of a climate-first, risk-led approach. That is coming through from a group and a body called the ISSB. They are affiliated and sister organisation with the IFRS, which runs a lot of the financial reporting. And that system and a programme is being used. The UK earlier this week released the final version of the ISSB.
Sorry, people online can't hear.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So we've just launched that as well for the UK. It's been applied out in Australia, in Canada. We've revised the European standards. China has adopted the same standards. California has adopted the same standards as well. And what's most important about this, the ISSB wouldn't have happened without Donald Trump in his first term in office. The reason is we were happily going along on a nation-led programme beforehand until, in his first presidency, he said, the US isn't going to support this. So out of that came, we moved away from a nation-led programme and moved it instead to an institute-led programme. And we've ended up, in 6 years, developing a standard and having it adopted by pretty much most of the global nations. We've fast-tracked a programme that probably wouldn't have happened in any other way. So we've now got and found ourselves a route and mechanism for a global system, climate first. We're starting to look at biodiversity, we're starting to look at human-led risk issues as well as part of that. So I think that has led us to far faster and far greater progression than we would have had previously. The other part that we've started to have a look at is what does this mean then in terms of sustainability trends and activities as well? So if we are now starting to have a global programme, a set of standards, they have to be reported at director level as part of annual accounts. It also means that we have verification. It means that we need to have audits and audit-ready strategies as well as part of that. It means that we need data to be able to substantiate that, and data which is also verifiable. It also means that we need to have systems and processes within the FM teams who understand it, who can not only look at it downwards in terms of the data, but also communicate its relevance to the business. And it also means that we need to have that proposition in place about why it's important. An awful lot of what we have been talking about over this morning. So there is a piece of work that we're engaged with at the minute with the partners that we're working with. And the key parts that we're looking at is around some of the material issues for the sector. And this has come from previous studies that we've done. We've got decarbonisation, so that's scopes 1, 2 and 3 of properties and the operations and the activities. There's a significant part of operational buildings which isn't accounted for in most organisations' reporting. So how do we do that? We're shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't include it, because that is the very essence of what we do as well. We look at social value and going back to the original core purpose of social value, which is how do we improve social mobility? How do we provide means and mechanisms of being able to improve those who have come from a disadvantaged background to help them to get to the career which they can achieve? It's looking at well-being. Martha said 2013, I think you mentioned about that. So it's 13 years now since we've been talking about it. It's still a nascent subject. Lots of misunderstanding about what we can do, what we can achieve as part of that as well. But again, part of its potential is about linking with productivity. If we provide a better workspace, we have a team that's better able to deliver and become more productive in their outputs. That's the proposition from an FM back towards the C-suite. Finally, it's looking at those risks and opportunities. That's not just climate risk, it's looking at the risks associated with technologies and various other risks, but all of them will also have a significant opportunity added to it as well. So we're having a look at this from the history, 2020, where we are today, but also looking ahead to 2030, and saying what do we think is going to be happening. It's long enough away to be thinking about including it within forward budgets, but it's also close enough that we should be well on the trends and track to trying to get towards these positions. So, what does that look like? So for everything that we've done, we've used the Gartner Hype Cycle. And this goes through a nice profile that we see for the development of each of these themes, these 4 themes that we've looked at, and it starts to understand around the cycle of behaviour that we get in each of these individual activities. We have a starting point, a trigger that takes place, where we start to achieve a lot of noise being generated. There's a lot of talk about it. We also have lots of organisations and service providers who start to talk about the provisions of an offer which they're able to provide. And then we get into a phase of a peak of influence. So this inflated expectations, we can solve the world in one go. This is our panacea for future life. What can be achieved as part of that? Then we go into a downward trend where we start to realise and recognise actually the cherry on the cake wasn't everything. Yes, it has some value and purpose, but we didn't really understand it enough to embed it in as part of the business proposition, to embed it in as part of what we wanted to do. And then we progress on from that through the latter 2 stages, the slope of alignment, plateau of productivity, where we start to bed it into our business processes, systems, and get the delivery that we then intended. So that's the table and the profile that we're starting to look at for each of these. So when we start to look at decarbonisation, we're starting to look at where we were in the 2020s. This was at a time when Glasgow was going to be hosting COP26. You had pretty much every organisation on the planet, and certainly every UK organisation, saying they're going to be net zero by 2025 or 2030 at the latest. Everyone pushing ahead on these targets. I was talking earlier on, we had in 2021 the first FM provider to say that they were a climate positive organisation, and they put that forward as part of their profile and their sales pitch. So where have we moved on from that today? So today we have gone through that decline, and I think there has been a recognition from an awful lot of organisations that yes, the direct impacts of what we can do and deliver, we can implement those initiatives. Those are within the direct wheelhouse of FM. So that's the gas, the electricity, the vehicles, and so on. When we start to look at scope 3, that tends to be a bit more difficult. That's the purchasing of goods and services. It's the commuting, it's the home working activities. For standard organisation, office-based organisation, scope 3 is about 85 to 90% of the total emissions of a business. So to say it's not important, and we're going to focus upon what we can do in terms of the buildings directly, then misses out on a huge role of what FM can do and should be doing in terms of decarbonisation. We're starting to get into the frame of now understanding that, so we're expecting by 2030 for that to have bedded in. Some of the barriers that we have around that, we still have a huge amount of miscommunication, I'll put that politely, around what organisations are achieving, what they're doing, and the way that that information is being communicated. So documents like the carbon reduction plan does a disservice to a lot of the work that companies are doing on carbon reduction decarbonisation programmes. And putting forwards fuller information in that I think would be of benefit. But also in the same way, we had a conversation or comment earlier on about procurement. Procurement teams better understanding the data that they're being and that they're reviewing would also be certainly a help in being able to challenge some statements that organisations are making and to get greater transparency that's starting to come through. So there is a piece of work that we've done which has put in place a Scope 3 framework for FM sector. That has now been adopted by UK GBC for their whole life building programme. It's also been adopted by ICS and UK government as part of the net zero carbon building standard. So do have a look at that. That should be the standard that's adopted by the FM sector. Looking at well-being as an activity and as an area as well. As I mentioned earlier on, it's a nascent area. We're starting to develop this. And certainly in 2020, lots of noise starting to be generated in this area. We're going through the pandemic at the time. We're talking very much about how do we care for our teams, how do we care for those within the workplaces as well. And today, we're at a stage where there's an increasing level of communication, discourse around well-being, what it can do, but we're still trying to figure out what it really means for business. What is FM's place and role for the provision of services around well-being? Or what is it that we currently do that is supporting well-being strategies and programs? There's a strong linkage that we have with the ISO 45000 series, so 45003, which is starting to look at the well-being elements as well. And it is taken very much in terms of the man in a van type approach and looking at supporting the well-being of those individuals. The question then is, where is it that the FM sector can start to take that further? What else can we do? And there's two key elements. One is, as a provision of a service, can we provide and offer that to organisations? the understanding the underlying data and information that supports well-being comes out from the 1950s and 1960s and studies that have taken place over that time. Yes, they need to be updated. Yes, they need a larger cohort of groups of people involved in it. But we have a good starting point in terms of the basis of improvements that can happen. We did a big piece of work in my John's Controls days, looking at a finance sector organisation and looking at how control and a changed floor would operate. Productivity level changes in there was in the region of 10% over the first few months. And that was from a changed environment and engaged environment. So we know that there is an opportunity for those improvements. So into the future, 2030, we're starting to see this go through the peak and then into the downward. So what that means for us is we're expecting a lot of noise to be generated, a lot of hype to be spoken about the subject before we then get into an understanding that we can start to build this in as part of the systems and process of delivery for the organisations. And in some respects, well-being is following onto a similar trend around social value. And social value, again in 2020, we were on the climb. There was a lot of talk around it. It was part of PPN 0620. At the time, we were getting an understanding that it was a public sector requirement. We can sell lots and lots of things as part of it. We can get awards and contracts as part of selling a good story on social value. And we've been through that cycle now where over the last few years, we've realised actually a lot of the data and the numbers that we're getting out from social value are meaningless. There are so many different ways of how we communicate the information, and in the report we give a great example from CIWM, Chartered Institute of Waste Management. They looked at 3 different social value models. They found a factor of 20-fold difference depending upon which social value model you use. I need to talk very quickly now. In terms of how that information got represented. So if the influence of your numbers and social value is more about which system you choose to use than it is about what you've actually done, it takes away from the validity of a lot of that data and needs to move us into a different frame. So a lot of the progression that we're starting to look at is how do we improve on the underlying framework so we have better trust in the numbers that are coming through, we understand what they are, and they can be used for decision making. And the final area that we're looking at was around the risks and the opportunities for the sector. And this one probably caused us the most amount of consternation, discussions that we're having. And we've ended up thinking of this in 2 separate areas. We've seen the opportunities starting to progress a lot faster than the risks. That in itself is a big problem for us. So we're starting to see the opportunities already now progressing up towards the top of the peak. The reason for that, it's very easy to sell and communicate opportunities to a business. There's no senior manager that doesn't want to hear about those opportunities. It's far more difficult to talk about risks, and in general, do we talk about risks that last for more than 3 years within our business? Inherently, they're still focused towards a 12-month, 18-month sort of time frame. So some of those risks are becoming the biggest challenges that we have looking ahead. So, what do we need to change? So, a lot of this will resonate as well with some of the points being made by other speakers. It's almost like we've collaborated on this, isn't it? So we certainly need a greater level of client ownership. And when I mean client ownership, I don't mean the real estate teams or the FM teams. I mean the senior management, the C-suites. It's an understanding from that level about what it requires to deliver a lot of these practices. Do they really understand what FM is and the running of the buildings, the health and the well-being of their staff, about achieving their targets, the goals which they've set out, the role which they have of being able to support social value. So that requires education, but it also requires communication. The way that we present information to help align with business practices also needs to change. We need an overhaul of procurement processes. We've spoken about that beforehand. I think we no doubt will talk about that again later today. How do we actually start to look less at cost, looking at 5-year, 10-year total cost of operation activities, so we've got a better way, a different way of being able to articulate that value. Being able to use technology. Technology, I think as Andrew's spoken about very well, has a huge role to play. It generates and produces lots and lots of data and lots of information for us. It can help to resolve a lot of things. But if it's not connected in with the business strategy, if we don't understand what we're trying to do, it causes more of a problem and becomes a barrier to further progression. Skill sets to develop. And it's one of the biggest challenges that I have, and I've been talking about this for a very, very long time. The skill sets around sustainability should be fairly standard. We should be deploying this in the same way that we deploy finance skills, health and safety skills, etc., for everybody in the sector. So there should be a core common knowledge around what do we mean by the subject, what's the value proposition that we have, what can we achieve, what can we do. That should be second nature to FMs, because an awful lot of what we do is about connecting the dots together and being able to communicate that information. And it's also about that data quality in itself. We have lots of data. Are we collecting the right data, and are we putting that forward? Are we using it in its correct manner to be able to tell a story and to be able to advise the forward programs that organisations should be taking? And finally, it's about the frameworks and the regulations. They are in place. How do we use them? How do we set in place a forward plan? The ISSB regulations, the UK Sustainability Reporting Standard, which I mentioned, it takes 2 to 3 years to get that fully embedded into an organisation. The first reporting year will be 1st of January 2027 is the first financial reporting year, so it's 2028 that we're likely to see the first reports coming out. So we're already only into a 2-year time frame for the reporting to be due out. I'm being shouted at here as well. So just as fun, but so the report will be out shortly, and also more information, do have a look. So a lot of what we're producing, we try to push out into the sector as well to get that uptake and get that consistency. Thank you.